Behind every piece of printed music is a story, but what happens when a piece gets lost? When a stack of pages goes missing from a folio of manuscripts? How do we know who wrote the piece and if the piece ever existed to begin with? The story of Fanny Hensel's Easter Sonata begins with a single diary entry, one simple sentence which would spark one of the greatest mysteries in piano history. On an April morning in 1829, Fanny's younger brother, the prodigious and now more famous Felix Mendelssohn, was leaving Germany to go on his first tour of England. Fanny, a devoted diarist, made meticulous note of the seemingly mundane events of this bittersweet day. At first glance, nothing seems particularly out of the ordinary about what Fanny wrote, but it's the very last sentence of this entry, the very last event which Fanny makes note of on that day, where our mystery truly begins.
I played my Easter Sonata.
This single sentence has sparked a musicological situation that challenges everything we know about who Fanny was, both as a composer and as a person. In many cases, when a famous composer's works are rediscovered, like the recent revelation of that short waltz by Chopin, it's a short piece, or perhaps a very early or very late marginal work. Fanny Hensel's Easter Sonata, however, is not like that at all. It's a substantial four-movement work, one which marks a very significant development in Fanny's compositional style, incorporating Fanny's study of composers like Bach and Beethoven with her own unique compositional voice. A voice which is very much informed by her relationship with her brother, and yet somehow it vanished for nearly 2 centuries. Before we continue the mystery, however, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us continue doing what we're doing here on YouTube. Later in 1829, a few months after the diary entry which started it all, we find the only other sign of the Easter Sonata's existence that we can point to from Fanny's lifetime. She received a letter that her brother Felix had actually performed the Easter Sonata while on a pleasure cruise departing from Liverpool. Apparently the boat had a Broadwood, and he somehow either had the score with him or knew the piece from memory and played it on the boat. Writing to Felix after finding out this news, she commented on the unusual circumstance.
But dear Felix, that you in the Atlantic played selections from my Easter Sonata on a Broadwood would be infinitely grotesque if it were not so absolutely wonderful. I amuse myself with it all week long.
And then that was it. Silence. No other sign of the piece until 1972, when something terribly unlikely happened. The piece reappeared. The Easter Sonata was recorded by the French pianist Eric Heidsieck, who had access to the manuscript which had landed itself in the hands of a private collector. But there were a couple of problems. The first being that when this recording was released, it was released as the Easter Sonata of Felix Mendelssohn, not Fanny. And this is a problem that has plagued the study of this work for quite a long time already. Many scholars were under the assumption that a young woman of the 19th century couldn't have possibly written a piece as substantial as the Easter Sonata. A woman writing a sonata, poppycock! And the second big problem was that, well, nobody seemed to care. At the time, scholarly interest in even Felix Mendelssohn was far less robust than it is now, and the 1972 recording was an artifact that many people, musicologists included, simply didn't even know existed. And it's a shame, because I think that even though the recording quality is perhaps a bit lacking, Heidsieck's interpretation is strong and really gives this piece the gravitas that it deserves. But even after an official recording, despite the fact that it was under Felix's name, the piece would again disappear into obscurity. The next few decades were a tumultuous time for this sonata. In 1975, it was discovered that in a folio of Fanny Hensel's manuscripts, a large chunk of pages was missing. It was theorized that perhaps this could be the much mythologized Easter Sonata. One musicologist, apparently unaware of the recording that Heidsieck had made, thought that the title of Easter Sonata referred to Felix Mendelssohn's Scottish Fantasy, Opus 28. I guess apparently you can just go ahead and start assigning titles to whatever piece you want these days. Yeah, potato, potato, rock to twinkle, twinkle, what are you know. I think I've said this already quite a lot, but I just want to emphasize again that for many decades, the piece that Fanny talks about in her diary, this elusive Easter Sonata, was thought to be lost forever. But then something miraculous happened. The musicologist Angela Mace Christian, who is really the heroine of this whole story, without her, this video would simply not exist. She found the recording that Eric Heidsieck had made of this so-called Easter Sonata. She had a feeling that perhaps the piece that Heidsieck had recorded was indeed the sonata that Fanny was talking about in her diary. So she got in touch with Heidsieck, who put her in touch with the owner of the manuscript, and she was finally able to do what no other musicologist had done before her, to study the manuscript firsthand. Fanny often didn't sign her manuscripts by name, so it wasn't possible to identify it simply by looking for the signature. Instead, Christian was able to deduce that it was Fanny's piece by studying the handwriting. Details as minute as how Fanny would write a diminuendo compared to Felix, or how she wrote her treble and bass clefs, became instrumental in positively identifying that this was indeed a piece by Fanny Hensel. Finally, the work was premiered under Fanny's name for the first time in nearly 2 centuries by the pianist Angela Lim in 2013. 2013 was such an epic year for the girly pops. Taylor Swift, Rihanna, Fanny Hensel. So how in the world did such a substantial piece, and one that is really remarkably beautiful, get lost for so long? Well, the answer is quite a complex combination of factors, including historical bias, musicological confusion, and the very unique and sometimes tragic circumstances of Fanny's life. Fanny was born in 1805, on the same birthday as me, November 14th. Scorpio sister, let's go. It was just a year after Napoleon had declared himself Emperor of France, and needless to say, the political and social situation of the time was shifting rapidly. Indeed, this changing world would leave quite a lasting impact on Fanny's musical legacy. She was born into a high-class, wealthy family, which, while ethnically Jewish, chose to assimilate to the German Protestant culture of the time. The composer who would most define Fanny's musical upbringing was already with her from birth. Her mother Leah, who was a great supporter of Fanny's musical ambitions, commented after her birth that she had Bach fugal fingers. I love imagining like a tiny little baby with gigantic, like Glenn Gould hands. Fanny, of course, did spend quite a lot of her musical training studying the works of Bach. In fact, both she and her younger brother Felix received an absolutely top-notch musical and academic education. Both of them studied with the absolute best teachers that they had access to, and both were known as prodigies, performing together in salons at the Mendelssohn home. Already from a very young age, Fanny was composing, and Lied was the area where she could be most personally expressive. But where her brother's prodigious upbringing was allowed to flourish publicly, him having the lauded debut with the Midsummer Night's Dream Overture, which is still a staple of orchestra programs, when he was only 17 years old, Fanny had to keep her abilities somewhat under wraps. On her 15th birthday, her father wrote to her, "Perhaps for Felix, music will become a profession, while for you it will always remain but an ornament. Never can nor should it become the foundation of your existence and daily life. Remain fast in this conviction and conduct. They are feminine, and only the feminine ornaments women." It wasn't easy, but it also wasn't impossible for a woman to have a flourishing career as a musician in the early 19th century. Take, for example, Clara Schumann, who of course had a very robust career as a pianist and composer. The problem for Fanny, however, is that unlike Clara, she was of an upper echelon of society. Women of the upper strata of society were expected to be domestic goddesses, putting all of their energy and talent into maintaining the home. Clara, having come from a more middle-class background, and of course making the mistake of marrying Robert Schumann, meant that she had access to music as a career path. Fanny was very aware that she had to be careful about going against society's expectations for her. In addition to her own gender and class dynamics, she had to contend with the tenuous position that her assimilated Jewish family had in the social order. And not only that, but she already had some controversial divas in her family, such as her aunt, who was the author of several scandalous novels, which had already made a splash.
Ladies and gentlemen, her.
But of course, Fanny's creativity and passion were not going to be stifled, and thankfully she had two people who were really, really big supporters of her. The first was her mother, who of course facilitated her musical education and encouraged her musical pursuits. And the second was her husband, the painter Wilhelm Hensel, who really believed in his wife's ability as a composer and was very encouraging to her as well.
My own and Hensel's enjoyment in music prevents me from totally dying away, and that I persevere through such a complete absence of incentive from outside, I interpret to myself once more as an indication of talent.
And in the Easter Sonata, we can hear just how unique Fanny's voice truly is. If you care about the depths of piano history, then check out Tonebase Premium, the platform that makes videos like this possible. They're currently having their spring sale, so it's a perfect time to get started. On Tonebase Premium, you'll find great lessons from some of the most inspiring piano teachers from around the world on really the essentials of the piano repertoire, from Clara Schumann to Felix Mendelssohn and Rachmaninoff and beyond. Check the link in the description below to get started. It wasn't just handwriting that helped Angela Mace Christian identify that this was indeed a piece by Fanny Mendelssohn. Hey everyone, a quick note from Editing Robert here. A couple times from now into the rest of the video, I say Fanny Mendelssohn, but I wanted to make you all aware that Fanny Hensel seems to be the way that the scholarly consensus is to speak about this composer in the present day. Of course, Fanny Mendelssohn is a very colloquial, understandable way to talk about her, but I just wanted to make you all aware of that moving forward. Now back to the music. There are some really specific and special aspects of this work which point to it being hers rather than her brother's. Fanny is a bit more adventurous in breaking down the traditional structures that she was working in a way that's very reminiscent of late Beethoven, which of course she and her brother were both studying quite a lot at the time. Her training with Bach is also very present. The first movement of the sonata immediately brings to mind late Beethoven, a beautiful opening theme giving way to lyrical development. Personally, I immediately think of A Thérèse, a similarly experimental and lyrical work, but perhaps Opus 101 is the true inspiration, also in A major. In the second movement, we hear Fanny's vocal influence. A fugue appears, bringing to mind her brother's E minor fugue written around the same time, but of course also her study of Bach's counterpoint. The third movement is a scherzo, which immediately brings to mind another April-themed work of Fanny Mendelssohn, her piece April from The Year. The Year, of course, is Fanny Mendelssohn's 12-month cycle of pieces, which is probably her most famous solo piano work now. But it's in the fourth movement where the Easter of the Easter Sonata really comes into the foreground. At around the time that Fanny would have been writing the Easter Sonata, both she and Felix were singing alto in the St. Matthew Passion. It's pretty amazing to think about this because, of course, St. Matthew Passion is a staple of Easter concerts all over the world now. But at the time that they would have been performing it, it was probably one of the first times in like 100 years that the piece had been performed. Fanny seems to employ a lot of similar themes and topics in the last movement of the Easter Sonata. The fast material in the left hand is very similar to the kind of gestures that Bach uses when symbolizing the crucifixion of Jesus on Good Friday.
Earthquake music in the fourth movement, which is a typical passion musical element. When the curtain is rent and Jesus dies on the cross, that earthquake is depicted by tremolos, usually in the bass.
And the unusual and absolutely beautiful chorale that Fanny ends this piece with has to be one of the most magical things about it. It's quite unexpected, but I think it might even represent the resurrection of Jesus in the Easter story. It's somehow so transcendent. It's related, of course, to the chorale near the beginning of the piece, but also it feels like it lives in its own universe. And after all the drama and storminess of the last movement, it just feels so incredibly special. Fanny's own tragic end is another big part of why her reputation didn't last as long as perhaps it should have. She died in 1847, just a year after she finally decided to start publishing her works. Nevertheless, even though she died at the age of just 41, she managed to write over 400 pieces in her lifetime. It should be noted that her brother Felix's wider notoriety didn't help him all that much either. He was trashed in the later part of the 19th century in anti-Semitic tirades, including one by none other than Wagner himself. His music was banned by the Nazis, and he was repeatedly called feminine in the derogatory sense back at the turn of the 20th century. Thankfully, things have improved since then, and of course, Felix is now a staple of the repertoire. I mean, everybody plays the D minor trio in conservatory time, right? It's just a great piece. But I do feel like this kind of historical reputation that he had as being a lesser composer or kind of a lighter composer is still kind of in the subtext of how we think of his music compared to, say, Brahms or Schumann or Chopin even today. As such, Fanny's music has suffered a similar fate, but perhaps even more pronounced, because not only is she dealing with the difficult reputation of her brother, but she's dealing with the circumstances of her gender, class position, and early death as well. Thankfully, we are living in a time when many people are interested in rediscovering works by composers who didn't perhaps get the recognition that they deserved during their lifetime. Lots of musicologists and performers are beginning to bring these works to light. Of course, there's still a lot of work to be done. It's rare to see Fanny Hensel's music being played by the kind of like top tier, upper echelon of pianists, but progress is happening. For example, Isata Kanneh-Mason, who is an incredible young rising star pianist, recorded the Easter Sonata on her recent Mendelssohn album. And I love this recording. I think it's a really dedicated and strong interpretation of this piece. It gives the piece the poetry, the fire, and the dramaturgy that it deserves. And even if Fanny sometimes downplayed her compositions as just part of her domestic life, as she did in that diary entry, we know that under the surface, she was an incredibly passionate and talented musician. She once wrote,
It must be a sign of talent that I do not give up, though I can get nobody to take interest in my efforts.
The story of Fanny Hensel's Easter Sonata reminds us just how much wonderful music there is out there that is still left to discover. We have an opportunity to see what has always been there and to really listen. Thanks so much for joining us today, everyone. It's always a pleasure to bring pieces like this to your attention. I'm really eager to hear from you. Which piece do you think I should talk about next? Did I inspire you to perhaps learn the Easter Sonata? I think it's a really great piece that's quite accessible in a lot of ways, so let me know what you think. Also, please leave a comment, like this video, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us to continue doing what we're doing here on YouTube, and for me to keep telling incredible and important piano stories. Also, check the link in the description below to get started with a free trial of Tonebase Premium, where you can take your piano playing to the next level. I'm Robert Fleitz from Tonebase, and I'll see you next time. This single sentence has since sparked, oh my god, a freaking tongue twister. This single sentence has since This single sentence has sparked a musicologicalists. We shall be discussing the mysterious mystery of a piano history. Okay. An upper-class woman writing a sonata? We shan't have it. We shan't have it around here. I'm so sorry. Of course, Fanny's own tragically early end is a great... It's great! We love death!